Hi all, I have another fantastic game example showing the art of attack. This game was Alexander Alekhine against Lajos Asztalos. So, before getting into it, there's some philosophy to consider, like what is the art of attack, what makes attack successful, how has attack evolved since the era of Morphy. You could say that Morphy, in his time, using the King's Gambit, it was quite a big commitment in terms of material, and it could easily backfire. Actually, there was less flexibility to the attacks in the Romantic era. It was like do or die, burning the bridges, very committal. The modern player doesn't always want to burn their bridges behind them. They want to keep their options open. You could call this less commitment. I like to think of it as maximum independence, because to me there's a correlation to another domain in programming where you don't want to hard code things. You want to make things as flexible as possible because you don't know what the future requirements might bring. So in chess terms, when you attack, maybe you want to play in a way with maximum independence for your attack, maximum flexibility. And it's funny, this game, that actually there is a commitment made which could have, I believe, backfired. It's very evident from the opening, actually. So this idea of independence, I want to raise something. Someone on YouTube is very passionate about Emanuel Lasker. So one of the predecessors to Alexander Alekhine, a world chess champion, and we all sit on the heads and shoulders of earlier generations. It was Lasker, apparently, that observed a long time ago that every action is essentially a diversion, a transition from equality to some spatial or temporal commitment. So he alluded to that concept of commitment, and he went on to say an attack on the king demands a very large diversion, both in terms of the number of pieces involved and the degree of commitment arising out of any pawn moves it entails. So in the Romantic era, yeah, there was these huge commitments and they often backfired. We want to attack with more flexibility, and Alekhine maybe demonstrated with his attacks minimal commitment, so not King's Gambit, and a bit more independence. So there could still be some choices of plans, maybe a choice to transition to an endgame, maybe just win on material. It doesn't have to end in checkmate. So independence, maximum independence when attacking is a very interesting concept for me personally to consider. So even if I'm not going to become world champion, at least I can philosophize about chess to you guys. So this idea of commitment, but let's have a look at this opening. Alexander Alekhine against Asztalos, as I was about to say. So knight f3 from Alekhine, d5, we have a very positional opening. So less committal, you could say, than the King's Gambit. White is not committed to losing pawns necessarily in a bad way. Taking that pawn is not a big deal. There's always a check and taking it back. It's not really a gambit here. It's not a real gambit like the King's Gambit. So anyway, d4, knight f6, we have bishop g5, and actually after h6 being played, there is a commitment by white here. White takes on f6, and this is entirely logical. The trade-offs here, the swings and roundabouts, are actually really interesting, and generally overall I believe in white's favour. White has given black a potentially dangerous trump card, so there is a commitment of black potentially having very dangerous dark square counterplay in this opening. If that dark square bishop can have the right conditions and open position, it could be super dangerous without the counterpart, and we know that from neural network games, especially Stofflev's. Brilliant when there's a bishop without a counterpart. So anyway, Alexander Alekhine creates quite a lot of preconditions for the attack, which we could also equate to independence, by trying to make the position more favourable, I believe, for the knights. We have knight c3, c6. Nowadays, actually, bishop b4, trying to use that dark square bishop immediately. There's high-level games here. For example, Carlsen against Movsian, Dubai 2014. Carlsen won that, but it's very topical, actually, this position, and thought to be, good chances for black. But we see here a slightly passive move, c6, and it allows white to gain e4 uninterrupted, because that would have put pressure indirectly on e4 by pinning the knight. So e4 is not played immediately, though, because there is the possibility of that nasty check after. But bear that in mind, queen b3 covers bishop b4 now. And in fact, it gives white the chance to gain space out of this opening. We have knight d7, e4, and you'll see here, okay, white's gaining potentially a lot of space with e5 if allowed. But remember, black has the dark square bishop. We have d takes, knight takes. And in fact, black has this kind of luxury move on the dark squares, showing that white's dark squares are a little bit vulnerable. Black could have also just retreated to queen, back here. And this kind of position, has been seen before in high-level chess, or rook ad1. For example, Sheparanov has played from this position against Petrosian in Dubai 2016. That ended in a win for white, though. So, but yeah, there's some trade-offs here. Black has that bishop pair. So anyway, here we have queen f4. And now bishop d3 protecting the knight. Bishop e7. Also, topical is e5. That's quite interesting to try and fight on these dark squares immediately. And there's a game, Levon Aronian against Liran Tzvitsli 2017, which ended in a win. Ended in a win for Levon Aronian. So there's a great game there after e5. In fact, it's so short, it's only 30 moves. Let me just quickly flick through that for you. So Levon actually got a very good attacking position. The dark square bishop didn't mean much. While we're trying to blast through this diagonal, this is a very attacking game in its own right. And in fact, knight g6, fantastic move. Knight e7 check. And here, it gets really interesting. Both knights, knight on f5. And here, the h file is now another road for the attack. So this is actually a fantastic attacking game, modern one, in its own right. And after this, black resigns. It's pretty nasty stuff. Though it's worth analysing, but the king's, I think, is being dragged out after rook h6 to its peril. So yeah, there are games, high-level games with e5, trying to fight on the dark squares immediately. You can see that bishop without the counterpart is the thing which might represent a commitment by white, which is why I'm mentioning it with this game. So white castles here. Bishop c2 has been seen in a game of Levon Aronian as well. So he's a fan of this variation with white. So Levon Aronian against Peter Leko in Tromsø 2014 ended a win for Levon in 50 moves. I'm not going to show you that now. So anyway, white castles, black castles, and here we have rook fe1. This seems very logical. Rook d8, rook ad1, queen c7. And queen c7 does portray the idea, now that the queen's back there, that black should fight on these dark squares to maximise this bishop. This bishop is without the counterpart. It is white's commitment has been expressed in giving black that bishop pair in particular. This bishop without the counterpart, I think, is very, very important to consider. And this next move by Alekhine shows, as we've seen before, he loves putting his knight on g3 at all costs. So we've seen this variation with knight e4 in an earlier video on the channel, which ended in a lot of draws in his match against Capablanca. He loves putting his knight on g3. It's a bit of a habit, but I think technically it's a mistake here, because c5 is actually quite dangerous. It's a small little mistake. If we look at bishop c2, this meets c5. And it's important to meet c5 because this bishop is being liberated here. For example, d5 is the bishop's not such a big deal. After knight f6, knight takes. This, we have queen d3, and it's quite kind of dangerous. A big pass pawn on d6. So that's why this move, bishop c2, makes it much easier, it seems, getting this battery ready. It makes it much easier to meet c5, which tries to maximize black's trump card out of the opening. But we see this luxury move instead, knight g3. Now black repays the favour with another luxury move, knight f8. Black had to really do something with this bishop. Knight f8, if c5 instead, well, first, b6 is another move which has been seen in a high-level stem game. Alimo Davo against Miguel Najdorf, Havana 1952, which ended in a win for Najdorf in 45 moves. But c5, I think, is also critical. So b6 is interesting. c5, for example, d5 knight f6. try to lure these hanging pawns into fixed positions and try and exploit those resultant dark squares when the pawns are on light squares. This should be even. For example, bishop b1, bishop d6. You can see black's dark square grip. I mean, this is one of the whole points of the modern Bodoni, to get a dark square grip. This is a very solid position for black. So c5, in fact, black is doing really well there. Black would have the advantage technically. That bishop pair is really quite mean. And in fact, like Benoni here, black has a 3-2 pawn majority. So it's interesting that knight f8 puts white really back in the driving seat. But this next move does meet potentially c5. This next move, queen c3, with d5 in a quite advantageous way. If bishop b1, you can see the power again of c5, just basically equalizing. And you might have had this experience in these structures where you've really got nothing here. The knight's covering h7, and black's bishop pair, and especially the use of the c5 square, is rather painful. You might have experienced this pain. I know I have in many games. And you might be thinking, is this what happens? Is this really what happens when you give black the dark square bishop? But in this particular game, yeah, it's fortunate this knight f8, because now queen c3 is a really good move. a5 is played because I think black might have been concerned with the ghost of the threat b4, which I'm not entirely sure is that brilliant. You know, black can use it to undermine dark squares. It's not really a threat, but black treated it like a threat and played a5. It's very interesting though. If c5 now, this really can be met with d5, and if bishop f6, queen d2, this is very interesting. For example, the d pawn is immune because of the classic bishop h7 and queen takes d5. This is just very interesting for white. This is a small edge, or a meaningful edge. And here, if e takes, c takes, bishop f6, queen c1 is probably one of the more accurate moves, and holding up that d5 pawn and protecting f3 with bishop e4, white should have a small edge here. So yeah, there are ways of meeting black's aggression with c5 now. Okay, so anyway, a5, and it does concretely threaten bishop b4, skewering the queen and rook. That's attended to as well with a3. Black plays a4, but this is quite a commitment on black's part. The whole context of this position favouring the bishops is questioned pretty soon, because if white can close up for the knights will love outposts in this position. And black's only got one knight left, so if anytime c5, it's not that bad for d5 if there's only one knight. We have knight e5, queen a5, queen c1 here, bishop d7. And this move really, I think, destroys the position for the dark square bishop totally. c5. For me, this destroys black's trump card in the position and makes the environment much better for the knights. So I think really the preconditions are being ramped up in white's favour now. That notion of independence, I think it's much more favouring white. The knights can even at leisure, because the bishops are locked in their own pawn structure here, especially the light square bishop, the knights can reroute at leisure. And in fact, from a calculation point of view, as Ginger GM mentioned, he mentioned a fantastic trick of visualising where your ideal knight outposts are. Like, take this off of the board mentally, and where would you put it? You might want to put it on c4 or b6. So that kind of calculation trick comes evident in this kind of closed position where you've extinguished the power of those bishops. So that's something to bear in mind when you have, I think, the extra knights here in a more closed position now. You can start visualizing where you want your knights. b5 is giving away, it seems, a free hand, but maybe, you know, white was threatening also knight c4 quite a lot for knight b6. Black wanted to extinguish knight c4. So black's been a bit paranoid about white's threats, and it seems as though white's got a really free hand now in the position. Also, you know, as well as knight c4 to b6, it also, you know, b6 was pointless because of that as well, because of that tempo game would be winning a pawn. So anyway, b5, it seems as though black's shutting down his own counterplay. We have bishop e4. Okay, that pawn is protected, and we have queen c3, we have bishop e8, and now, yeah, where do we want this knight? Because this knight is not as great as this one, even though it's Alekhine's favourite position for a knight, that he'll play knight e4 over and over again to get a knight to g3, but it's not the best placed in this particular position. He does move it. Knight e2, we have rook a6, knight c1, so the knight might be heading either for, you know, b4 or e5 to recharge this other knight if needed. E5 looks more menacing to me. You're looking over the king side, as well as it has greater flexibility, greater independence to hit c6 as well as hover over the king side. We have knight d7. If f6 here, in fact, this knight can go back, and this is a very pleasant position for white. So knight d7, black doesn't want to commit yet to f6. Knight takes. So this other knight can recharge that outpost square e5, and does so. So more aggressive than on this side of the board, looking over the king side. And we have bishop f8. And now h4, this really signals that white's kind of optimal, is prepared to make pawn commitments. Pawns don't go backwards. They're the ultimate expression, in a way, on the chessboard of irreversibility, not keeping independence. So this is the signal for the attack is on. Rook a to a8. Bishop drops back to b1. h5. We have queen f3 hitting that pawn. g6, so black is trying to secure against that diagonal being a menace. g4, just ripping it open. hg, queen takes, we have bishop g7. And now here, there is some trick that black has, a trick mechanism with f6. Alekhine uses a pin to sort of remove the opponent's defensive resources in advance, a virtual pin emerging potentially with bishop a2, potentially very, very useful on that diagonal, potentially pinning pawns if ever any f6, that pawn on e6 would be vulnerable. If h5 immediately is just to show that it's not really that accurate, allowing f6, because white might have to be forced into a concrete commitment, burning the bridges a little bit in this position, but white still stands better, but this is not burning bridges so much and just building up, ramping up for any pawn break. And we have here b4 threatening b3. It would give black counterplay. Before looking at that, if bishop takes e5, rook takes e5 is important, otherwise the whole advantage is lost. What would be better there? But if you play d takes, this is a way of losing the entire advantage in the position, with black being better here, controlling that file that is burning bridges totally. The attack's just disintegrated. So be careful about that. So b4, though, is threatening potentially b3. We have bishop c4. If white took here, well, there's a couple of things. If h5, b3, this isn't so good for white. Black can actually get an even position. The bishops help at least defend the black king there. And if AB instead, a3, there's a bit of counterplay there, which we don't need to give black. So we have bishop c4, b takes, queen a5. And here, this is a spectacular position, actually. The queen, black, is setting the opponent, setting Alexander Alekhine some naughty little tactics here, trying to dissuade h5. Would you play h5 here? If I give you 10 seconds to think about this move. h5 or not? Just yes or no. Just type yes or no when I stream this. So 10 seconds. Yes or no for h5? It turns out here, Alekhine played on move 35 queen e4. It turns out h5 is a real crushing blow to black's position. Because after g takes, you don't play queen takes h5 to let black have any tricks. You either play queen h4 or queen f4. In both cases, you've just opened up the g file, which means that if you move the king and rook g1, you're pinning that bishop, and black's going to be soon terminated. I'll give you one example. Queen c3, king h2, so making way for rook g1. This position, there's rook e3 gaining a tempo anyway. You can slice with bishop takes e6. Yeah, this is phenomenal stuff. This is absolutely a disaster for black, the g file. So h5 is a real shredding move, which could, it seems, have been played here in this position. Not queen takes h5 because rook takes d4, and there's that little tactical trick, which would be a cold shower to white completely, and losing, e5 is loose after that. But as long as that little trick is bypassed and just use the upside without the downside, which is to shred open the G file, it seems this works quite well. Queen h4. Doesn't seem to be too much objection. If bishop takes, rook takes, and here, black's king is without much king safety. If that's the best move, that's not very impressive. To say the queen. So yeah, it seems h5 was an interesting technical opportunity. But anyway, queen e4 with h5 still on the card. So safeguarding, you could argue, the position, both e5 and e1. But h5 is still clearly on the cards because this bishop can always come back as well sometimes, or it will just be left there. Just try and use this G file. We have queen c7. The queen goes to f4. We have rook ab8, and now h5 was played, and it's still acting in the same manner. It's shredding open the G file. The pawn structure the pawn chain is being dismantled anyway at potential base. When you take out the base of the pawn chain, it ripples through. So that is taken, and Alekhine essentially uses that killer plan now. King h1. So the G file to pin the bishop. Rook b7. We have rook g1, and now after queen e7. White to play here. 10 seconds. Do you burn your bridges? Are there bridges to burn? Is it worth it here? It's worth burning the bridges here. Let's throw away the notion of independence. Just go for it. You're going to terminate the game here. That's the point. You don't need the system to survive beyond checkmating the opponent in chess. That's how it differs from IT systems. You can find that moment of execution where it doesn't matter if you sacrifice every single piece except one. If you've checkmated the opponent, that ends the game in your favour. It seals the deal, so to speak. Here, this is sealing the deal. So rook g1. We have king h7, but here Alekhine falters at move 42. The answer to life, universe, and everything is not revealed totally, is it here? Slightly controversial. Alexander Alekhine plays knight takes f7 in this position, and the game ended here. Black just thought he was being obliterated. You can understand that because of bishop d3 and queen h6 mating. For example, okay, bishop takes check and mating. Maybe he felt that. But there's other stuff going on here which actually casts some doubt on that. With queen takes f7 instead. This is a very resourceful idea. And if bishop d3, there's some doubt casted on this. And if queen f6 is the most accurate move here, but Alekhine's analysis had rook takes g6, and it's not entirely that clear. But Alexander Alekhine didn't have access to Stockfish 11 to tell him all these answers. This is the thing. You can have all these questions and the answers will get better and better with greater technology to analyze the actual game. So what is the question here at move 42? What is the question? What does white want to play here? But just before I just get into that, hold on a sec. After knight takes f7, let's have a look at again queen takes f7. So instead of the unclearness of bishop takes, well here, of rook takes, apparently queen f6 is a way of getting an advantage. For example, here, the queen with the rook still around, and if that pawn goes, there's two connected passed pawns. So this should be a big advantage. So Alekhine was right, but there's a better way to do the implementation, it seems. In fact, there's a stunningly simple way to do the implementation at move 42. And for 1,000 points, 1,000, no, actually, no, 100,000 points, white to play and win with the most concise, crisp move available on this chessboard position. What would you play here? 10 seconds to pause the video. Now, I thought I was being a super nerd in finding this resource, but it has been documented at Chess Games Con for quite some time. It's actually a knight retreat. And you might wonder, what on earth? Why would you retreat the knight? It turns out you slightly put the king in a worse position. And black gets obliterated here. So you don't go for it. Actually, you slightly improve the preconditions for the attack, you could say. The independence for the attack. With actually the king in a worse position, gives you more options for double attacks. If the king's on the g-file, for example. Whatever black does, he's being obliterated here after this knight retreat. For example, f6, bishop d3 check. And we just take that. This is trivial. Obviously, this is crushing. Obviously. So what does black actually do after knight f3? So rook d5, we just take knight g5, and then a nasty, when the king's on the g-file, it's pretty nasty. For example, like that. If rook b d7, as example, check, knight takes f7, the king's in a worse place than in the other variation. Queen h6 is mating. Yeah, it's just a total disaster after knight f3. There's no defense. If you think there's a defense, please let me know. There doesn't seem to be any defense. So just to recap, f6, check is all over. If king h8, queen h6 is going to be absolutely crushing. The bishop's on h7. There is also another way to win as well, but that seems to be the most destructive move, just the knight retreat. It slightly tampers with the configuration of the position for king safety. There's also queen at move 42. There's actually queen g3 here as well, which is pretty convincing, setting up a battery. And if queen f8, queen h4 hits d8 and h5, and it's after f5, queen takes d8. This is quite crushing. If f6, bishop d3 check, bishop g6, and a bishop takes e8 is absolutely crushing. Taking it's going to be very, very nasty for black. So yeah, this final move it did cause the opponent to resign. The opponent really trusted Alekhine, it seems, as well. And you could argue that trust was expressed earlier when the ghost of a threat after queen c3, it wasn't really a big threat. After a5, black killed his own counterplay because he was worried about ghosts of threats. Maybe he had a bit too much respect for Alekhine and really wasn't that objective about the actual threats in the position. But anyway, it is a fantastic example of the art of attack and the notion of independence. A nice building up those trump cards. But actually there's something naughty about this opening. It is imbalances for both sides. Maybe black could have tried to improve with c5 timing on knight g3. But because black's trump card was completely crushed, it ended up with white having these gigantic knight outposts and was able to just shred the black king. Black didn't give himself a free hand at all because of that queenside lockdown, bishop's lockdown. So white just shredded open that g-file. So it is a fantastic demonstration of quite a few things. And maybe, please let me know, what do you think about this question? Do you think the art of attack is the art of maximum independence? Please let me know what you think about that one. Okay. Comments, questions, likes, subscribes, all appreciated. And check out Kingscrusher TV /Art of Attack for a fantastic course there, which is definitely going to improve your attacking skills, especially with the amazing insights and commentary of Grandmaster Simon Williams, aka Ginger GM. Okay, thanks very much.
Every battle is won by preparation. We've taken one of the most popular chess books ever written and rewired it for the modern player. The Art of Attack. Learn with Chessable's state-of-the-art move trainer technology, presented by myself, Grandmaster Simon Williams. I'll talk you through 29 hours worth of educational video content. From attacking the uncastled king, bishop sacrifices, diagonal attacks, and classic pawn storms. Paint your opponent's king into a corner with the Art of Attack.